Almost no Harley engine dies suddenly. That's the part owners find hard to believe when they're staring at a teardown estimate. The big failures, the spun bearings, the scored cylinders, the cam plates ground to shavings, they announce themselves weeks or months in advance. Quiet sounds, small leaks, little changes in behavior that get dismissed as character. Shops see this constantly. The bike was talking the whole time, nobody was listening. Today I'm going to walk you through the 7 early symptoms in order, from the easiest to miss all the way up to the most urgent. And that 7th one is the symptom riders wave off as normal more than any other. Stay for that one. One more thing before we start. Everything on this channel, the diagnoses, the fixes, all of it, I put into one plain English handbook for Harley owners. The link's in the description, and there's a code on your screen if you want it. For now, let's get back to it. Symptom 1. Your oil is going dark faster than it used to. You pull the dipstick at 800 miles, and the oil already looks like it did at 2,000. Most riders shrug at this. Oil gets dark, that's what oil does. And on a bike that gets ridden hard and long, that's fair. But notice the pattern. If your riding hasn't changed and the oil is aging faster, that's not nothing. That's the earliest note in the whole song. Here's the diagnosis. Think about how you actually ride. Short trips to the diner. A loop around town on a Sunday. 15 minutes here, 20 there. On a short trip bike, the engine never gets fully, deeply warm. Combustion produces moisture and unburned fuel, and on a long ride, heat cooks those contaminants back out of the oil. On short hops, they stay. They build. Moisture and fuel dilute the oil, and diluted oil breaks down faster than the mileage on your odometer suggests. So the oil in a garage-kept, lightly ridden Harley can be in worse shape at 1,000 miles than the oil in a touring bike at 3,000. The darkening is your first visible evidence. Here's my prescription. Change your oil by time, not just by miles. If the calendar says it's been a season, the oil comes out, whatever the odometer says. And once a week, take the long way. Get that engine fully warm for a sustained stretch and let it boil the moisture back out. It's the cheapest preventive medicine in this entire video. So that's the earliest sign, oil aging ahead of schedule. Now let's go one level deeper, to something you hear rather than see. Symptom 2, a faint top-end tick on cold starts that takes longer to quiet down than it used to. Every air-cooled Harley makes some noise when it wakes up. Push rods, lifters, rocker arms, they all clatter a little until oil arrives. Riders know this, which is exactly why this symptom slips past them. The tick itself isn't the warning. The change in the tick is. Here's the diagnosis. Cold oil is thick oil, and thick oil is slow to climb to the top end of the engine. For a few seconds after a cold start, the valve train is running on whatever film was left behind from the last ride. A brief tick that fades as pressure comes up is normal, but a tick that used to fade in 5 seconds and now hangs around for 30, that's a trend. A lingering tick can flag valve train wear or a lifter that's starting to struggle, and lifter problems on these engines have a habit of getting expensive if they're left to develop. The service data is clear on this. The tick almost always shows up before the damage does. Here's my prescription. First, actually measure it. Next cold start, count how long the tick lasts and write it down. Do it again in a month. You're not listening for noise, you're listening for growth. Second, be gentle for the first few miles. Let the oil warm and thin before you ask the engine for real work. And if the tick is clearly getting longer or louder over time, that's when you investigate, while it's still a lifter and not a camshaft. Now, a quick self-check. I want you to pause on this one because it costs you nothing. The next cold morning, before work, before coffee, go out to the garage. Start your bike. Don't blip the throttle. Just stand next to the engine and listen. Count the seconds until the top end goes quiet. That number is a baseline, and a baseline is the single most useful diagnostic tool an owner has. Your bike's been trying to tell you. This is you finally taking the call. So the tick that lingers is the ear's early warning. The next symptom is one you feel through the seat and see on the gauge. Symptom 3. The engine runs hotter than it used to, or the oil temperature climbs faster than it once did. Riders blame summer, they blame traffic, they blame the tune. Sometimes they're right. But when a bike that used to shrug off a July ride starts cooking its rider in the same conditions it always handled, something has changed, and it's usually not the weather. Here's the diagnosis. On an air-cooled V-twin, oil isn't just lubrication. Oil is the coolant. There's no radiator doing that job for you. The oil carries heat away from the bearings, the pistons, the heads, which means anything that reduces the oil's ability to move heat shows up as temperature. Run a quart low, and there's simply less fluid available to absorb and carry that heat, so what's left runs hotter. Run old, degraded oil, and it transfers heat worse even at the full mark. And on a Harley, the rear cylinder feels it first, because it sits tucked behind the front cylinder, half-starved for airflow. When shops pull apart heat-damaged engines, the rear cylinder usually tells the story. Here's my prescription. Check your oil level the way the engine actually experiences it, hot and with the bike upright, not cold on the side stand. Keep it at the full mark, not somewhere in the acceptable zone. Full. And start paying attention to how much oil the engine consumes between checks, because that number matters for a symptom coming up. Heat is the tax an air-cooled engine pays on every mistake. Keep the oil fresh and full, and the tax stays low. So, heat is the oil falling behind on its second job. The next symptom is the bike drawing you a map. Symptom 4. A weep or a drip that wasn't there before. There's an old joke that a Harley that isn't leaking is a Harley that's out of oil. It's a joke from a different era. Modern gaskets and seals hold. So when a clean bike develops a new wet spot, that spot is information, and the location is the diagnosis. Here's what the location tells you. Oil weeping down from the top of the engine points at rocker box gaskets or pushrod seals. Common, usually slow, and worth scheduling. Oil at the base of a cylinder points at a base gasket, which matters more because a base gasket doesn't fix itself, and the job gets bigger the longer it waits. Fluid under the left side of the bike points at the primary. Each one is a different conversation, and none of them should be a mystery. Then there are the two that change everything. Fluid near a brake caliper, a brake line, or the master cylinder, and anything that smells like gasoline. Those aren't maintenance items. A brake fluid leak or a fuel leak means the bike does not get ridden until it's fixed. Not to the shop, not around the block. Brakes that fade and fuel on a hot engine are how mechanical problems become injuries. Here's my prescription. Tonight, put a clean piece of cardboard under the bike and leave it overnight. In the morning, you have a map. The position of every drop tells you which system it came from, and the size of the spot tells you how fast it's moving. Photograph it, date it, and do it again in a week. A weep that stays a weep can be scheduled. A weep that's growing gets moved up the list. And a drop of brake fluid or fuel ends the discussion immediately. Quick note before we get to the big one. If this is helping, do yourself a favor and subscribe. Think of it as booking your next checkup, so the bike gets looked at before something goes wrong, not after. All right, back to it. So a new leak is the bike showing you exactly where it hurts. The next symptom is quieter, and you only catch it if you've been counting. Symptom 5. The engine is using more oil between changes than it did last year. First, the nuance, because credibility lives in the nuance. A healthy air-cooled twin uses a little oil. These engines run hot, tolerances breathe, and a modest amount of consumption between changes is normal and documented. If your bike has always sipped a bit, relax. That's character, not cancer. Here's the diagnosis. What matters is the rate, and whether the rate is rising. Oil leaves an engine two ways, past the rings into the combustion chamber, or past seals and valve guides. When consumption climbs, one of those paths is opening up. Rings wearing, guides loosening, seals hardening. And here's why this symptom earns its place this high on the list. Rising consumption is upstream of almost everything expensive. It's the measurable, trackable signal that the sealing surfaces inside your engine are changing, months before you'd ever hear or feel it. Shops see the pattern constantly. The owner who noticed the rate change caught a top-end job. The owner who didn't caught a rebuild. Here's my prescription. Track it. A note in your phone is enough. Date, mileage, and how much oil you added. That's the whole system. What you're watching for is a sudden change in the slope. A bike that used half a quart per interval for years suddenly wanting a full quart. A gradual, stable rate on an older engine is just an older engine. A rising rate is a trend, and trends caught early are cheap. Trends caught late have a core charge. So, consumption is the arithmetic of engine wear. The next symptom isn't about the engine at all, but it's the one most likely to leave you in a parking lot. Symptom 6. A slow crank, dim lights at idle, or a battery that keeps needing a charger. This is the symptom people negotiate with. They carry a jump pack. They park on hills, in theory. They tell themselves the battery is just old, and sometimes it is. But an electrical system that needs your help to do its job is telling you a failure has already started. The only question is which component is failing. Here's the diagnosis. And the good news is that separating the suspects takes 2 minutes and a $15 voltmeter. 2 numbers tell the whole story. First number, battery at rest, engine off, after the bike has sat. A healthy battery reads about 12.6 to 12.8 volts. Meaningfully lower than that, rested, and the battery itself is the weak link. Second number, engine running. A healthy charging system holds roughly 13.5 to 14.5 volts. In that window, the charging side is doing its job. Below it, the battery isn't the problem, it's the victim, and the stator or regulator is the actual patient. 2 minutes, 2 numbers, no guessing, and no parts cannon spending at the dealership. Here's my prescription. Do the test this week, before the bike decides for you, because these failures always choose the worst possible parking lot. And if your Harley sits, and most do more than their owners admit, put it on a battery maintainer. A quality maintainer costs less than 1 tow, and it's the difference between a battery that lasts 2 seasons and one that lasts 6. So the voltmeter separates the battery from the charging system in 2 minutes. And now, the symptom I told you about at the start. The one riders wave off as normal more than any other sound the bike makes. Symptom 7. A knock, a deep rap, or a new vibration under load. Here's why this one gets ignored, and it's an honest mistake. Harleys are famously noisy, and some of those noises genuinely are normal. That heavy clunk when you drop it into first gear? Normal. That's the nature of the transmission, and it has scared new owners for generations without meaning a thing. A little mechanical presence at idle, some shake at a stoplight. That's the engine you bought. This is exactly why the dangerous sounds get a pass. The bike has trained you to accept noise. But the diagnosis draws a hard line. A primary that rattles at idle is not the first gear clunk. And a knock or a deep rap that appears under load when you roll on the throttle, when the engine is pulling, is in a different category entirely. Load noise is the category most likely to mean internal damage. The bottom end, the connecting rods, the bearings that everything else depends on. This isn't a sound that's developing into a problem. It's the sound of a problem that already exists, asking how much worse you'd like it to get. Here's my prescription, and it's the shortest one in this video. Don't ride on a knock. Park it. A knocking engine that gets parked is a repair. A knocking engine that gets ridden becomes shrapnel, and shrapnel turns a repair bill into a replacement engine. The service data on this is as clear as anything in the handbook. The riders who stopped paid for a diagnosis. The riders who kept going paid for an engine. That difference is usually thousands of dollars, and it's decided in the moment you first hear the sound and choose what to do about it. So let's step back and read the chart together, top to bottom. Oil darkening ahead of schedule. That's chemistry warning you early. A cold start tick that lingers longer, the valve train asking for attention. Running hotter than it used to, the coolant, which is your oil, falling behind. A new weep or drip, the bike marking the exact spot on the map. Rising oil consumption, the slow arithmetic of wear. A slow crank and dim lights, an electrical failure in progress. And a knock under load, the final warning before the expensive part. None of these symptoms, caught early, has to end in a teardown. That's really the point. These engines are honest. They don't fail quietly, we just listen badly. And the difference between a $200 fix and a $6,000 rebuild is usually nothing more than a rider who noticed a change and took it seriously. Your bike's been trying to tell you. Before you go. Everything I covered tonight is one chapter of a full handbook I wrote for Harley owners. Buying smart, reading the symptoms, doing your own maintenance, and keeping the dealer honest. 90+ pages, plain English, no fluff. If tonight helped, that book will save you a lot more than it costs. The link's at harleydoctor.shop, also in the description, or scan the code on screen. Ride safe. I'll see you at the next checkup.